Thank you for joining me for the final part of a series entitled, How to Live a Spirit-Led Life. The conversation that we're going to have today is around the topic of radical hospitality, subtitle, The Key to Unlock Your Neighbor's Heart. Let's go and get started with the quiz. Here we go. According to a recent study, what is the next big public health issue? Is it drugs, obesity, loneliness, or tardiness? Second question, what is more powerful than the best sermon? The heritage singers, the influence of a Christian home, a trip to the Holy Land, or Dan Linroot's fire chili? Third question, what was wrong with both used vehicles that the Evans family purchased? The headlight was out, a rip in the driver's seat, a broken windshield, or the check engine light was on. And final question, what does the word hospitality mean in the Greek in Romans 12, verse 13? Friendliness toward animals, mutual love for one another, fellowship with other believers, or a love of strangers. We live in a society that is becoming increasingly isolated. It is full now of virtual friendships. If I look at my Facebook friends list, there's people that I've never met, I've never seen, but because we have quite a number of mutual friends, if they make a friend request, I accept them. But they're virtual friends because we're living out life online and we get to know each other that way, but not really in person. Things have changed. There's been a shift. There's a lack of quality time. And that's so important, but because we're so distracted by our devices many times, we're not seeing quality time like we used to. I want to share this ad that makes a very interesting point.
Is this being in the moment? Is this hanging out? And is this really playing with your kid? Don't stop what you're doing to capture what you're doing. Keep running, keep playing, keep dancing. Just keep doing.
GoPro, start recording.
Now, I'm not promoting GoPro here, but I think this makes a very interesting point about the challenges we face simply just living life. I remember going to the park one day and just noticing that even people riding their bicycles were on their devices. People in the swings were on their devices. People sitting in the benches were on their devices. It's challenging to find that quality time. And the result of that isolation, that alone time without that community experience, is loneliness. Loneliness kills. That's the conclusion of a new study by Brigham Young University researchers who say they are sounding the alarm on what could be the next big public health issue on par with obesity and substance abuse. It's interesting that 3 in 4 Americans struggle with loneliness. This level of disconnection is dangerous to our health. Loneliness has been alleged to have the same impact on our life expectancy as smoking 15 cigarettes a day with a risk factor that rivals excessive drinking and obesity. Friends, we need to do something about this. As a church, as individuals, we need to reach out and build relationships and friendships and bridges with people that are suffering. 3 out of 4 individuals struggle with loneliness. In fact, the United Kingdom has taken this so seriously that they've appointed a minister of loneliness as a government position. There's a survey that many churches have taken, and we can look at a cumulative result of Adventist churches in the United States. And there are a number of questions of the 86 questions. Obviously, there's some that are at the top and there's some that are at the bottom. But there's a number of questions on the bottom that touch on this concept of loneliness. Notice this. In our church, it is possible to talk with other people about personal problems. The results of this survey, this nationwide survey, the answer to that question, as people reflected, was not so much. That is not the reality I experience. Again, these are in the bottom 10 of 86 questions. The next one here. New Christians find friends in our church quickly. Again, the response to that question is not so much. When new people come to church events, we approach them lovingly and openly. Again, the response on this survey is not so much. What are some signs of relational disconnectedness in the church. One of those signs that I've noticed is that potluck is reduced to one time a month. It's just too much work. It's a bit of a hassle. And yet, if loneliness is such a big issue in our society, it will plague the church as well, won't it? And we need to look for as many opportunities to connect as we can. Second one here, the church empties quickly after worship. We need to be looking for opportunities again to be able to connect and linger and build relationships. It's a drive-in church. People live far away. There's no interaction with members outside of Sabbath morning. Sitting in a chair and looking at the back of someone's head for 2 hours does not deepen a relationship. If that's all we're going to do, why not stay home and listen to the sermon? Here's some great preachers that I can recommend. And yet, we're called to experience community when we come together. Let's take a look at some signs of relational disconnectedness during the week, Sunday to Friday. Here we go. Relationships are limited to social media. The family doesn't sit down and eat at least one meal together a day. There's no interaction with work associates outside of the workplace. And finally, we are busy to the extreme. So what is the relational toll to being disconnected, either on Sabbath morning or during the week? What happens is we are skimming the surface in relationships. But there is a biblical solution, and that solution is radical hospitality. What is radical hospitality? It is opening one's heart and home as a demonstration of the love of God. But hospitality takes courage. It takes a willingness to risk. Now I want to show you here since we're talking about welcoming people into our home, I want to share with you some fun doormats that I've been able to collect photos of. Check this one out. You get to choose whether you want to escape or enter. How about this one? You weigh in before you come. I hope you don't weigh out after you leave. Here's an interesting one. Please stay on the mat. Your visit is very important to us. Your knock will be answered in the order in which it was received. That sounds a little bit like a phone call, doesn't it? Got dirt? Here's a good one from the South. Hey, y'all. How about this one? Beware of the dog. Now, fortunately, that looks like a little dog, but check out the size of that cat. That looks a little scary. And how about this one? A fisherman lives here with the best catch of his life. That sounds really romantic. And then finally, you are here. Let's take a look at the biblical solution for loneliness, and that is hospitality. Notice what took place in the early church. Now, I often hear that we want to be like the early church, we want to grow like they did, but are we willing to practice the same things they did? Here's what it says. So continuing how often? Daily, with one accord in the temple, and breaking bread, how? From house to house. They ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their church daily those who are being saved. Notice here daily again. And daily in the temple and in how many houses? In every house. They did not cease teaching and preaching Jesus as Christ. Friends, that sounds to me like total member involvement. It wasn't like this group does it and that group doesn't. It was all hands on deck. Everyone was involved. The mission of the home extends beyond its own members. The Christian home is to be an object lesson illustrating the excellence of the true principles of life. Such an illustration will be a power for good in the world. Then notice this, far more powerful than any sermon that can be preached is the influence of a true home upon human hearts and lives. So why is it that the influence of the home is more powerful than a sermon? The home is really where the sermon of our lives is lived out. It's where we're authentic. It's where we're real. It's where we identify what it looks like to live out Christianity in our daily lives. People can see who we really are. It has a warmth to it. It has a welcoming atmosphere to it. I had this modeled to me by a lady by the name of Beverly Thompson. Some of you may know her. She lives here in the Northwest. She was like a second mom to me. And this is a lunch at her house one Sabbath morning or one Sabbath afternoon. And I believe I pretty much invited everybody that was there because she told my sister and I, you can come anytime you want and you can invite anybody you want to join you. And so we just made ourselves comfortable. Here I am with a few of my friends on a Saturday night in her home. You can see we just really relaxed and had a great time there. It was wonderful to grow up with this opportunity to experience what true hospitality is all about. And that model has been a blessing to me my entire life. I want to ask you a question. Is hospitality a spiritual gift? If you think so, just raise your hand right where you are. If you think hospitality is a spiritual gift. Or is hospitality a biblical priority for all Christians? Now, to answer that question properly, we need to see what Scripture has to say. There are 3 major spiritual gifts passages and one smaller one. But one of those is Romans 12, verses 6 through 8. And in this passage, 7 gifts are listed. 7 spiritual gifts are listed, but hospitality is not mentioned. Then there's a new heading. Now, we know the headings weren't in the original language, but the tenor changes. The verses take a shift from talking about spiritual gifts to behaviors that all Christians are to engage in. Take a look at this from Romans 12, verses 9 through 21. We're just going to highlight a few of these. Love. Now, is that a spiritual gift, or is that something that all Christians are to be involved in doing? By this, all will know you're my disciples if you have love for one another. Certainly, that's for everybody. How about abhorring what's evil? Is that for everyone, or just those that have the spiritual gift of abhorring what's evil? Well, we would say, no, that's for everyone. So we go down through this whole list, and then we come to this phrase, given to hospitality. So hospitality appears here in a list that's meant for everybody, not in a list of specific spiritual gifts. But let's take a look at this phrase, given to hospitality. The word given, literally translated, means pursuing. Hospitality is from the Greek word philoxenia, which means a love of strangers. So here we have this package of hospitality that means pursuing a love of strangers. Now, what I like about this concept is if we're pursuing something, that means we haven't arrived yet. If hospitality doesn't come natural to you, the point of this verse is turn toward it and start moving in that direction. For some people, it obviously comes more naturally than others. But we're challenged through Scripture that all of us are to engage in some way in hospitality. The word love is also used with this pursuing concept in 1 Corinthians 14:1. It's like a hunter pursuing a catch. This is something we're to go after and we're to experience. Now I want to ask you a question. Should your first invitation to an unchurched person, we talked about communicating with secular people, should that be to come to your church, or should it be to come to your home for a meal? Which is going to be more effective? Let's imagine I have a new neighbor that moves into the neighborhood. You knock on the door and you say, welcome to the neighborhood. I've noticed you've just moved here. I'm excited to get to know you. Would you and your family be open to joining us for a meal at my home? The chance of that invitation being accepted is close to 100%. What's the chance of a direct invitation to church without a relationship? It's pretty low. So I want to encourage you to express hospitality in your relationships. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers. For by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. In the Bible, there are 59 passages that refer to this importance of one another hospitality. There are 2 different groups that we're to show hospitality to. One group would be unbelievers. We've already touched on that one. But also we're to show hospitality among ourselves with other believers. We're to be hospitable to one another without complaint. In fact, hospitality is part of the description of being an elder in the church. An elder on that journey of hospitality should be a lover of hospitality. I want to encourage you next time you have nominated committee that you ask the question, are we electing elders that are lovers of hospitality? Are these the elders in our church? I hope not. I hope our elders are more like these ones. The Lord has given the work of entertaining to who? To a few people that have the gift? No, it says to all his people. It is not in God's order for one or two to do the entertaining for a conference or for a church. A lover of hospitality is among the specifications given by the Holy Spirit as marking one who is to bear responsibility in the church. This is beyond the elders, right? It's everybody. To the whole church is given the injunction, use hospitality one to another without grudging. I like this quote from John Stott. After Lydia and her household were baptized, Lydia then invited Paul and his companions to her house, which probably became the Christians' meeting place. For once the heart is opened, the home is open too. Isn't that beautiful? Well, it's not happening as much as it should. So there must be some barriers that keep us from expressing this kind of hospitality on a regular basis. So I want to help us knock down some of those barriers in our lives. Perhaps you'll identify with one of them as I share. The first barrier is to see that hospitality is not just for someone else. That means we need to turn around and look at ourselves and say, okay, hospitality is for me. I need to engage with it. The second point I'd like to bring to our attention is that everything doesn't have to be perfect. Simple is better. Sometimes we make things too complicated. We want everything to be just so. That's not a requirement to show hospitality. The next point is that you don't have to be a great cook because Costco is. Simply go to Costco and pick something up that you can share at your meal and your guests will enjoy it. This is a really important one right here. You don't have to be a sanguine. Sometimes people say, I'm an introvert. I'm more withdrawn. Being around people stresses me out. Simply invite a sanguine, an outgoing person to join you for that lunch, for that meal, and they'll help carry the conversation. And behind the scenes, you can be showing hospitality in powerful ways. I want to highlight a few practical ways that we can show hospitality because I think if we're practical, perhaps you're going to be able to identify some creative ways you can be involved. So I've entitled this Mara's Top 5 Expressions of Hospitality. That's my wife. And we'll start with number 5 and do a countdown. Home-cooked takeaway food for hungry single students. University students love home-cooked food. And if you have a university anywhere near you, they will appreciate an invitation to your home for a meal. In fact, not only would we cook for them that meal, but we would make enough food that we could always send some home with them. And to this day, this young man in the picture here is a friend of mine, and we can continue journeying through life together. Introducing your four-legged friends to your two-legged friends. Animals are a great way to connect. Perhaps you have cats, you might have birds, you might have fish, you might have dogs. To invite somebody to come over and be able to enjoy your animals or talk about them is a great way to connect and experience hospitality. Friends and neighbors for the holiday. I shared with you about our friend Robbo. There he is, right in the center of our Christmas dinner. Our neighbor didn't have plans for Christmas, so we invited him to our home. Holidays are such an important time to connect with people who don't have other plans. The next one here, international foods. And I have a question here. How many Koreans does it take to make kimchi soup? We discovered it takes 4. All of these young men were my students, and they gathered around there as my wife was making kimchi soup, which to them was an incredible expression of hospitality, that my wife tried to cook food from their country. And they all helped her season it in the end, and it was just an amazing experience. And number 1, family adventures with foster children, which is respite care, exchange students, and orphans. This has been one of the most enriching experiences in our life. I can share with you right across here 2 boys from an orphanage in Latvia that have spent a lot of time in our home as we've hosted them. The young man in the middle, his name's Masa. He's from Japan. He came to us as an exchange student and spent some time in our home. I was able to see him pray for the first time because he wanted to learn how to pray. It was just exciting. And you see the boys here on the far right. These are 2 boys that were in foster care that just hung out with our family all the time. Again, amazing opportunities to connect and be the hands and feet of Jesus, to show love through hospitality. but the top award goes to when I actually help in the kitchen. Is that fair enough? I want to close with a story, with an experience called Broken Windshields, Healing Hearts. We need a new vehicle, a new used vehicle, and so I found one for sale in a suburb that was about an hour away. I did a search on Craigslist to find it, and I negotiated a price, but the vehicle had a problem. It had a cracked windshield. And so I asked the man selling me the vehicle, $4,100 was the price. What a great deal. Do you know somebody who can fix cracked windshields? And he got on the phone right away. He said, yep, let me call my friend Margarito. He calls up Margarito, and they're in conversation, and he said, he's booked today, but he can come to your house tomorrow. I said, does he know that I live an hour away? He said, yep, he knows. That's no problem. He'll just write down the model, and he'll bring the windshield that you need. So sure enough, the next morning, Margarito and his wife, Brenda, show up at our house. When my wife comes outside and we begin engaging them in conversation, they had, Brenda in particular, had come across from Central America, and we had an amazing conversation, invited them to come to our home for a meal at some point. They were super excited to accept that. He gave us some business cards when he left, but I forgot about the invitation to our home. And I think this is what happens sometimes. We have really good intention, but our follow-through is lacking, and that's what happened here. But God had a way of bringing it back around again. We had to replace another vehicle, and I began doing my search on Craigslist again. And I can't believe what happened. We found the truck we were looking for in the same suburb, about an hour away. This is in a huge metro area, Dallas-Fort Worth, at the time over 6 million people. For the same price, $4,100, and with the same problem, a broken windshield. Well, this time I knew who I needed to call, and I got a hold of Margarito. And as we had that windshield replaced, I said, Margarito, let's get out our calendars and let's schedule a time for our families to get together. So that's what we did. Here we are, and we're just having some great conversations here. This is a number of years ago now, but it was such an impactful experience. Some of us went outside to play some soccer outdoors, and my wife began to build a beautiful relationship with Brenda. When we moved out of state, as my wife communicated this to Brenda, Brenda asked us something that surprised me. She said, would your family be willing to take my teenage daughter to live with you? What a huge request. What gave her that confidence and trust in us? Simply, we had opened our home and loved them through hospitality. Now, she didn't end up moving with us, but it really made that point strong and clear to me, and I haven't forgotten it. Check out this quote. There is a great work to be done, and if you go to your neighbor with your heart all warm and glowing with love, do you not think that you can find the key to unlock your neighbor's heart? The answer to that question is yes. So I want to leave you with two challenges. Part one. As our churches begin to fellowship again, I want to encourage you to increase opportunities for connection. If you've been having one fellowship meal a month, increase it to 2. If you've been having 2, increase it to every week. If you've been having fellowship meals, fellowship luncheons every week, start having a breakfast. The point is, we need to have opportunities to connect. It's why we gather together. We're not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together. We need to have those moments of connection, and we need to expand them. The second challenge I'd like to bring to you is that for the next 30 days, I want to encourage you to invite a neighbor or coworker to your home for a meal. Of course, once it's safe to do that with COVID-19 and so on, and then share a small gift with them afterwards. You will be amazed at the connections that will happen by that simple gesture of hospitality on your part. Pray that God will bless you as you engage with this and will give you the courage to step forward. I want to go ahead and take a look at our quiz as we close out. According to a recent study, what is the next big public health issue? Loneliness. As a church, as an individual, let's do something about it. Second question, what is more powerful than the best sermon? The heritage singers, the influence of a Christian home, a trip to the Holy Land, or Dan Linroot's fire chili? I don't know if Dan makes fire chili or not, but more powerful is the influence of a Christian home. Third question, what was wrong with both used vehicles that the Evans family purchased? They both had a broken windshield. Fourth one, what does the word hospitality mean in the Greek in Romans 12:13? It means a love for strangers. I have my contact information here. I hope that you've been blessed by these series as we look to live a Spirit-led life every day.
Hello and welcome back. Thank you so much for watching that presentation. I'm sure you have some comments, some questions that you would like me to ask Tom, and so you can take this time now to write it in the comment section below. I already saw one comment, Tom, welcome, from Shannon saying, thank you for this message. Excellent message. All of these messages this week have been really, really good. Now, just before we start, I have to mention this. Tom, have you ever tried a Schamburger or a Pronto Pup here at Camp Meeting before?
You know, I grew up attending Gladstone Camp Meeting, and so I was used to this phrase Schamburger, and then moved away from the Northwest as a young adult, and I never heard it again. And so when I came back, I thought, man, I've heard that before. And then I realized it's kind of probably been coined by Gladstone Camp Meeting, by Oregon Conference. So even Pronto Pup, too, that's kind of a unique name. But yeah, of course. Plenty of opportunities.
My family and I were here yesterday. We did the whole drive-through experience. The lineup was so long, but it was so worth it because we got a Schamburger, we got the Pronto Pups, and we got this kettle corn, and it was so good. I wish it was sold all year round, but probably for my health, it's probably better that it's only sold once a year. But boy, I would buy a truckload of this stuff. It is so, so good. So we had our first official camp meeting experience here at Oregon, eating those things, and boy, it was a really good experience. So,
you know, Rob, I think it's Adventist comfort food, right?
Yeah, probably.
They're not telling us how many calories are in these items.
And somebody mentioned to me in the lineup that they call it a Pronto Pup, but it didn't feel so pronto because of the lineup that was all the way out to the entrance of the driveway. But fantastic food, and really enjoyed, even though it was social distancing, just seeing some of those cars coming through with smiles on their faces. It was a great experience. Looking forward to next year. Hopefully we can, by God's grace, have everybody here and experience camp meeting as it's supposed to be experienced. So thank you once again for that presentation. Definitely a thought provoker for me, especially as it relates to how we can do church better, how we can take church to another level, reaching out to people in our communities. And I think that one of the things that you brought out in this message and very, very well was that we do live in a world of virtual friendships. You made a very good point there about how loneliness is a growing problem. Until you showed that statistic there, I didn't know just how significant that really was. And that we as a church need to increase our opportunities for fellowship. And I think one of the most obvious questions, one of the biggest questions that we have after viewing such a great presentation on radical hospitality is, how can we engage in radical hospitality in the world that we live in right now with COVID-19? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. That's a great question. I was visiting with one of our neighbors from our deck onto their deck yesterday, a couple days ago. And I take our dog for a walk to the park. And in doing that, you walk past people and you interact with people. And it's just being friendly in those times you cross paths with someone. When you're outdoors, you can easily keep more than the 6 feet distance, and you can still communicate. And so just being friendly and taking those opportunities when we're out and about to do that, I think, is very positive. Yeah, people are a little more concerned when you're inside closed spaces, inside grocery stores and so on. Not as many opportunities there as previously, but certainly outdoors. And it's summertime now, so the weather's great. There's a lot of opportunities to interact that way. But I really want to just share, this is a chance for us to really kind of do a reset in terms of how we think about interacting. and we can begin to, establish in our mind a new strategy for our family as well as for our church family.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, don't let the masks keep you away from people outside. Even we can still practice. There are ways to practice hospitality even during COVID-19. Is what I'm hearing you say.
Friendliness.
Yeah,
friendliness.
Yeah.
For sure. Hospitality probably as a phrase is more attached to having somebody to your home.
Okay.
And I don't think we want to lose that concept that that's really what it is.
Okay.
But we can be hospitable in the way that we interact with people, and that can be going out to a restaurant in the future. But right now, it can be just simply being friendly when we're out and about.
Yeah,
We say in Canada.
About.
Can you say that for us, Rod?
No, I don't say it like a real true Canadian. I say about. Does that sound Canadian?
It sounds pretty American then.
How do they say it in Australia? What's about in Australia?
It's more similar to America than Canada.
Okay. Okay. I just want to touch here on a little bit of on those 4 points you made on signs of relational disconnectedness in the church. Something that I really resonated with, and I do have a couple of follow-up questions based on this list. So number 1 was potluck reduced to 1 time a month. Point 2 was church empties quickly after worship. Number 3, drive-in church. That's just because members live further away. And number 4, no interaction with members outside of Sabbath morning. So one of the follow-up questions I've had is, number 1, you talked about, how potluck is reduced to once a month. And one of the experiences that I had in a couple of churches that I've pastored before moving here is that usually potluck is something great. People love potlucks. I'm sure that's your experience too. The issue becomes where potluck you need people to run potluck. It takes work to put on a potluck after church. And usually it's the same people doing it week after week after week, and eventually they experience burnout. So what possible solutions can you suggest to churches facing this problem?
Yep. Hey, Rob, I don't know if it's possible for me to share a video. Is that possible or no? I have a very short video.
I think you can. The guys in the truck
We didn't plan that.
No, but I think if you just share your screen, I believe that we can view it and hear the audio.
You disabled me from sharing my screen, but if we can't
is that right?
It's okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. Unless somebody from the tech truck can come over here.
In any case, that's all right. What I want to share is that before while we're in Australia, we're part of a church family that I think really exemplified what biblical hospitality can look like. Mm-hmm. We actually drove a bit of a distance. It was a church plant, and they had breakfast and lunch every week. When church finished, people would stay by for a couple hours afterwards, just fellowshipping. They would have any opportunity they could, if there was a holiday, if it was a church social, if it was a camp out. The calendar is always full, and even still, I follow on Facebook. You can see there's church activities happening all the time where people are getting together. And of course, as they have people that are Bible study interest or people from the community that they're getting to know, they invite them to join them for these activities. The church has a juice bar right at the front of their church that's on the sidewalk right there in the community. People come by and they purchase juice right there and interact with the members. And they have an op shop, which is like a used clothing store. That's the front of their church. Wow. The worship is in the back. And so they really exemplified, I think, in the 21st century, very much a first century kind of church. And I can tell you that it was just a tremendous blessing to be part of a community like that.
That's neat. That's a really neat idea to do that, for sure. So, just referring to that video that you wanted to show, I don't know if you're able to, if it's on YouTube or something, you could always place the link inside the...
see what I can do.
Yeah, see what you can do. I just received a response from the tech team. Yeah, I'm not sure we're going to be able to do that right now, just simply because of timing and things. But what you can do, yeah, if you're able to do that, we could watch it if you place the link either in the Facebook or the YouTube message, and folks can watch that. So number 2, just a follow-up question to that, is that there's some churches, some people that may view connecting or socializing following the church service a negative thing. You talked about one of the barriers being that people right after the church service just kind of get up and leave. And there are people that believe that, you need to come to church and everything needs to be solemn and everything needs to be quiet and respectful. And after church, you have to keep comments to a very bare minimal and leave, to kind of keep that solemn atmosphere. What's something that you can say about how we can connect after church to people who think that way? Yeah.
I think what I've seen churches where people are even ushered out as soon as church is done, and they think this is professional or friendly. I don't know what the value is in that, or maybe they want to make sure that things are quiet in the sanctuary, or that people aren't doing business in the sanctuary. And I think, obviously it's appropriate. We don't be talking about business on the Sabbath day and get a lot of those conversations happening, but I haven't seen that to be an issue, really. I think it's a straw man. It's something that we put up as a concern, but it's not really the reality. People are just connecting relationally. And I think part of the problem is that we have failed to see that fellowship is actually something very spiritual. Mm-hmm. It's part of a spiritual journey. It's something that we as Christians should be engaging in. So I would kind of discourage us from thinking that we need to be ushering people quickly out afterwards. This, sitting, as I said in the presentation, sitting and looking at the back of someone's head does not produce relationships. So when we finally have an opportunity to turn around and to engage with somebody and to shake someone's hand or hug them when COVID-19 is done, right? We need to take every opportunity for that. Mm-hmm. I think having a nice foyer that's very friendly and welcoming where people can interact there is very important. But if we have a fellowship meal every week, people will be staying around. And I think that's critical to continue that opportunity for relational dialogue.
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent point. A third question is, this idea that the churches that I've served in, more and more of them are becoming these churches where people drive in to the church. The church that I most recently came from is a church in a metropolitan area. And so, people don't live very close to the church anymore. They live further away and they drive in to church. So what are some ideas or comments that you may have on building community within the church, so between church members, to grow the sense of fellowship and community? How can we do that when we live so far away in some instances?
Yeah. There's probably a number of ways that can happen, Rob. And I'd say, first of all, it really starts with a desire to want to do that. And perhaps that desire may not be internal yet, but as we look at what the early church in Acts did, I think there's a motivation scripturally to say, we need to align with the way the early church functioned, which meant they were meeting every day. And so we need to get to as close to that reality as we can. I had a large young adult group in one church I pastored, and they had multiple small groups that met in various areas of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. That's a huge metro area. It's the least densely populated metro area, I think, in the United States. So you can drive full speed from one quarter to the other, and it'll take over an hour, and that's at full highway speeds. So it's a massive area. And we had people driving in from different areas of the city, but during the week, there were small groups that functioned throughout that whole metroplex. And that enabled people to connect relationally, which is very good. The other thing, knowing that people drive in, we want to make Sabbath as much of an all-day event as we can. And so the times that we are there, we want to maximize and make sure that we're doing things well. I know one church, for example, for fellowship, for their weekly prayer meeting at the church, they would have a dinner. So people could come straight from work, have dinner, and then have the prayer meeting during midweek. So there's a lot of different ways we can do that. And I think one principle that we can look at is whenever we have meetings, we should probably have food too, because that is something that naturally enhances fellowship.
Yeah, great. I think I love what you mentioned there about small groups, and I think that's a very powerful avenue, especially geographically. If you live in the same area, you find people with the same hobbies, and you can start little small groups during the week outside of Sabbath time. And I'm sure if people would like to know how to grow their small group or even start a small group, Don James has an excellent series all week talking about small groups. So someone can definitely tune into that to learn more. A couple of quotes, that you mentioned. One was from Adventist Home that really stuck out to me, and the other one was what you said. Adventist Home, you mentioned that far more powerful than any sermon that can be preached is the influence of a true home upon human hearts and lives. Adventist Home 31. And then you followed that up by saying people will more likely accept an invitation to your house for a meal than an invitation to your church. So question is, why do you think that's the case? And how can we begin changing the culture of our churches to be lovers of hospitality?
Yeah, that's a good question, Rob. When was the last time somebody turned down an invitation to your home, Rob?
I can't remember. Honestly, I can't remember.
It is socially, culturally appropriate to respond positively when somebody invites you for a meal or invites you to their home.
Absolutely.
That's a cultural norm, which means that almost 100% of the time somebody will be very receptive to that. Mm-hmm. It's not as culturally normal to simply invite somebody to your church, and maybe it should be, but the reality is that we need to build trust with people first. We need to build relationships with people first. And that best happens through showing hospitality right now during COVID, being hospitable in the way we interact with people. But, after COVID, by actually having somebody to your home. Yeah. So I think, we have some of those barriers that concern us. One of them may be that, I'm not, outgoing, or perhaps my house is a bit of a mess. And we throw up all these things. And I think we kind of over stress about it or over analyze what's involved in being hospitable. And we just need to get to the basics with it and just show ourselves friendly. So I remember moving here into this new neighborhood, and we know the names of 3 different neighbors, the homes around us. But our very next door neighbor, the one closest to us, brought us over some cookies as we first moved in. I mean, it's just showing ourselves friendly. It's easy to do, and we don't have to make it more difficult than just doing something. And I think once we start doing something, we're going to see how enjoyable it is. But we just need to get started. Yeah,
I agree. That's a really good point. Just wrapping things up here. You talked about the barriers of hospitality, thinking, you just touched on some of these, thinking that hospitality is for someone else. It's for everybody. We're all called to show hospitality. 2, thinking that everything has to be perfect. And you know what? I have to say this. In some cultures, it is like that. There's no way, even in my background, my culture from Eastern Europe, if somebody comes to your house, things have to look just right, and you have to bring out food, and you have to, I think maybe here in the States, things are a bit more relaxed, and so people can just, enjoy the fellowship more. Absolutely. You want to say something on that?
Yeah, no, I had that experience in Eastern Europe where I was in a choir tour when I went to Newbold College in England. Mm-hmm. And so we traveled over to Eastern Europe. And I remember, oh my goodness, they had slippers for us to put on at the door. And then they had just all these different courses of food that they brought out. And I mean, I was completely stuffed. And then they opened up the refrigerator and pulled out this massive cake. And I'm like, man, I'm going to die. But they had gone to so much effort. And it was so beautiful. And I remember it to this day. But, we don't need to think about it that way here in America, that everything has to be just so. Costco makes some great dishes that we can just warm up, and they'll be very much appreciated.
Yeah, oh, that's a good point. I'm laughing just because I know when I was growing up, my mom, every time somebody was coming to our house, it was like a big deal, it's a huge thing. It's hard sometimes to kind of switch that mentality and understand that, it doesn't have to be so put on and so extra. Yeah, that production of value. Yeah, absolutely. Number 3, you talked about you don't have to be a great cook. Costco is. You just mentioned that. I love that point. That was excellent. Number 4, you don't have to be a sanguine. Invite someone who is. I think that's one of the biggest things. You have people that one of the biggest barriers, because you have people that are more introverted, and they would feel very intimidated to invite somebody to their house and then to think, I have to keep conversation with them. I don't know who they are. I don't know what they like. So you mentioned a possible solution is to invite a sanguine. What if you can't find a sanguine to join you for that meal? What do you say to that?
Well, it's probably worth the effort if you want to have a great experience. So it's good to plan ahead and
Sure.
and see if you can pull that off.
Sure. Okay, last question for our presentations is, do you have any books or resources that you can recommend to our listeners who would like to know more about this topic?
I do have a book I like to recommend, and the book is in the Bible. It's called Acts.
Okay, all right.
Look,
great resource.
Acts makes it very clear what it looks like to live a committed, sold-out life for Christ. And we talked about some of those principles in this presentation, but I would encourage you, just go and read the book of Acts and see what it says to you about Christian hospitality. And then I think the challenge is really, Rob, we kind of know what it says already. Mm-hmm. It's just that we aren't doing it. And I think we really want to grow like the church grew in the book of Acts, but we're really not doing the things they did in the book of Acts. And so I don't expect that, we go from, 0 to, infinity, right away. But we need to take a step. There's a next step. Maybe we decide, hey, we're going to have somebody over to our home once a month. That's the next step. Mm-hmm. Maybe we say, look, we've started doing potlucks only once a month. Let's go to twice a month. Or when we go back, let's figure out how we do it every week. I do want to add one more point on that, Rob. And I think part of the reason that churches back away from doing it so often is people get burned out. And the reality is we get burned out when we don't feel that what we're doing is making a difference. So I think pastors in particular need to be very affirming of those that have the ministry of making food and serving others, and those that are setting up and cleaning up and doing dishes. I think leaders, elders, make it your job to affirm those that are bringing dishes and those that are in the kitchen working. Go out of your way every time that happens to go and say thank you. What you're doing is making a difference. And I think that's all that is needed many times for there to be an energy boost. I can tell you there was no issue whatsoever in that church that I was a part of that had breakfast and lunch every week. People were highly motivated to be engaged. And they made it a very organized way so that the work was spread around. But the relational vitality in a community like that is something you would not want to walk away from. Yep. In fact, when we moved here from Australia, that's what we want to find. We want to find a community that is engaged like that, and so, or contribute so that one can become that way. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So anyway, once you've experienced it, you don't want to go back. And I would just challenge us to step it up and to stretch ourselves.
Yeah, very good way to end our series. We enjoyed our time with you, Tom. Thank you so much for your presentations this week. Your presentations were on point. Your presentations have encouraged us. I learned a lot. Our listeners have learned a lot from your presentations. If anybody would like to see the all four, you talked about divine appointments on the first day. Second day, how to live a life led by the Holy Spirit. Yesterday, we talked about spiritual conversations with secular people. And today, we're talking about radical hospitality. Excellent topics. If anybody wants to view them again, they'll be online. And we just want to thank our viewers for tuning in. to these presentations, and I'd like to just have a closing prayer to end our time together. Let's bow our heads. Our Father in heaven, we thank you so much for what we have learned this week, the journey that we have been on through what Pastor Tom has been sharing with us. God, we long for the day when COVID-19 will be over and we can join in fellowship with one another without any hindrances. But until that day, God, we pray that you would continue to lead us through your Holy Spirit. We thank you for your love that you have placed in each one of our hearts. Help us to share that in unique and inspiring ways to people who live around us who are facing loneliness. And we want to pray a special blessing over Tom's ministry and this camp meeting as we only have one day left. We thank you for these blessings, and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.